Hello and welcome everybody to this new episode of Mind Explorations. Today I have Dipti Tait, and we have a problem pronouncing names today again. And Dipti is going to talk about grief, not the funniest of subjects, but grief is a very important subject to discuss when you're working as a hypnotherapist because it often comes up. And that's one of the main questions we get in hypnotherapy groups. How can I remove grief for a client? And I think we might find out that it's not as easy as a one session fix. So welcome, Dipti. Good to have you here. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So tell
yes.
me, Dipti, what is it that you do? First of all, introduce yourself and whereabouts are you located?
So I am a solution-focused hypnotherapist and also a psychotherapist and a grief
Hmm.
author. I've written 2 books about the topic of grief,
Hmm.
and I'm based in the Cotswolds in the UK. So
Beautiful place.
yeah, very
Yeah.
nice.
Okay. So is it grief you're specializing in as well with clients?
Unfortunately, yes. I
Hmm.
didn't want to specialize in grief at all. It wasn't what I thought I wanted to do as I became a hypnotherapist. But just like, was it you, Kimberly, who was talking about your
Yeah.
mother? So when I was training to be a hypnotherapist, that's when my mother died.
Oh, right.
As I was training, she died. So before that, my dad had already passed away from
Mm.
cancer, and both of them I was nursing through cancer. And I'm an only child. So I
Right.
was holding all of that, burden all on my own. And
Mm.
if you're an only child, you don't really have anyone else. Well, you feel you don't have anyone else that
Yeah.
shares that with you. So that's basically what happened while I was training. And this was, going back 15 years now. So
Mm.
while I was training, I was also starting my grief journey at the same
Mm.
time. And that's when I started writing my first book, which is called Good Grief. And it wasn't really because I wanted it to be a book. It was mainly
Mm.
because I was just trying to work out what was going on in my own, head,
Right.
my own heart, and my own body. And I had no idea how to process all of this stuff.
Mm.
So I started writing, and then that actually turned into book number one. And then because the book number one did okay, I got commissioned to write book number two, which is called Planet Grief. And then I became the grief woman.
Okay. So is there so much to say about grief that you need two books for it, or did you specialize in a specific part of grief
That's a
after
really
this
good
first book?
question. That's a really good question. So the first book was mainly to do about, death.
Mm.
That's really the focus of that book, of how to
Yeah.
deal with death in that way.
Mm.
And as I said, it wasn't meant to be a book originally, it was more for me.
Yeah.
But then it turned into the book. The second book is called Planet Grief, and that's because I believe that the planet is grieving, not just because of death, but because of life. So
Right.
life throws circumstances to us in change and in loss, and then we can still feel the same symptoms as if something has died or someone has died.
Hmm.
And that's where planet grief becomes a bit of an, bigger look at grief as a life model rather than a death model, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Right. Okay. So yeah, we do have celebrations of life. Is that connected in some way as well? So instead of
It's more
funerals, we
about
call
what
them celebrations of
changes
life.
in our life without death
Hmm.
being involved. So it could, as in a death of a person or a death of a close relative or anything like that. It could be like death of identity or death
Mm.
of relationship or death
Right.
of purpose. So it's still a death, but it's not a death of a person necessarily.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, the grief and life that we have. You made this comparison. Grief is life.
Yeah.
So okay, explain that a little bit for me, please.
So I believe that when people hear the word grief, they
Hmm.
usually think of death, as
Hmm.
I've experienced a bereavement.
Yeah.
Not, of course, there is that whole, model that we've got to deal with our clients who are dealing with actual loss from death in that way. But I think more importantly, when people come to us for other things that might not look like they're grieving, for
Hmm.
example, they might be anxious about X or fearful about why, they are anxious and fearful, but actually, I believe fundamentally they're grieving something.
Okay.
And that's really what I wanted to share today, is about how to spot these, signs, because it's about our nervous system, essentially. So I have a little kind of nervous system led clinical framework that I work with, that I
Mm-hmm.
formulated. And it's only a very short slideshow, but what I thought I would do with the practitioners here today is share this slideshow and explain a little bit about
Mm-hmm.
what it is I do and the steps, and then help people understand this is the main thing that I really want everyone to come away with. There's no technique.
Right.
It's not
Yeah.
about a technique. It's not
Mm-hmm.
about an induction. It's not
Yeah.
about getting the right language pattern under your belt. This is actually such a different way of looking at it. It's not about, even though I'm saying this is my model, it's not really a model, it's more of a framework. So just an
Right.
understanding.
Yeah. Okay, so when somebody, a hypnotherapist, asks for advice from other colleagues and they say, what technique can you tell me for grief? What is it that you tell them? Besides, you have to have a different perspective. What is grief?
So in a way, in a very few simple, language, grief is emotional overwhelm. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because you can't think, like, if I ask people, okay, point to where your grief is, there's no
Yeah.
indication. It's not actually a physical symptom, or
Mm-hmm.
it can turn into a physical system, but it actually stems from our emotional system. That's why
Mm-hmm.
it's very hard to localize,
Right.
It's not even in the mind. It's more in the feeling. And the problem with grief is that it's so ephemeral in a way. It's so hard to distinguish and diagnose and point at.
Mm.
Therefore, it becomes hard to clinically diagnose in a way.
Right. Right. Mm-hmm. And clients who come to you, do they differ in how they express their grief, how they show their grief, how they talk about grief?
Yes. Yes, and that's why it's so important to not just focus on the words that they're using, but
Mm-hmm.
realizing that underneath the words, there is an emotional, felt, nervous system dysregulation going on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what my sort of little talk here is all about. It's about how do we understand that this is about the nervous system. It's not
Mm-hmm.
about thinking, behaving. Of course, if our nervous system is more regulated and calmer and settled and safe,
Mm-hmm.
then of course we're thinking better, then we're feeling better, then we're behaving better. So
Yeah.
most of our models, our NLP models or our other hypnotherapy models, are dealing with process or behavior,
Yeah.
or thought or mind or
Mm-hmm.
repetition in that way. But if we're not dealing with the absolute fundamental nervous system regulation, if we're actually not feeling comfortable and safe within, none of these protocols or processes are going to make any difference. Well, they
Right.
might make some difference if you try it out, but then left to your own devices, you come back again to that feeling of generally feeling unsafe or unsettled.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I know what you mean. We have a lot more to achieve, or we can achieve a lot more when we are speaking to the nervous system or dealing with the nervous system instead of just the prefrontal cortex and just using snazzy words, basically.
Yeah.
So, would you say that grief and trauma are related, or would they be potentially the same?
I mean, we could then replace the word grief with trauma, because in a
Right.
way, the grief response and the trauma response, actually response is the wrong word even to use,
Hmm.
because we're not responding when we're
Yeah.
feeling traumatized or when we're feeling pain or we're feeling grief. We're reacting, that's
Hmm.
what's happening. The nervous system isn't responsible in that way. It's reactive, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. So it should really be called the grief reaction or the trauma reaction, not the response or the pain reaction. So when we are in reactive mode, we are not nervous system regulated and we're in the sympathetic, aren't we? Not in the parasympathetic. And my work is very much based in neuroscience, like
Yeah.
I can't remember who was saying, was it Kimberly who was saying about the old-fashioned hypnotherapy course she's on. Ours is very much new fashion. About, it's all about how do we actually bring neuroscience and the modern understanding of how the brain works and the body works and the heart, gut and the mind connection works, and how can we bring it all together in something that makes sense for us as human beings, feeling and thinking and experiencing.
So when you say it's a nervous system reaction, what is it reacting to in that moment?
I guess it's reacting to change and loss, or both. So either something has, even if, this is an interesting point actually, even if something has changed and you are expecting that change, even still, we can still experience grief. And even in the good times, like getting married or like becoming a mum or a dad or something, we can still experience grief. And so people don't really understand that as a principle. They think, well, why am I feeling like this? What's wrong with me? But actually, because something has changed or something has been lost. So even in marriage, you might be losing a sense of, I don't know, identification because your name has changed. You might be losing a sense of autonomy or agency or independence, and becoming a parent. You're definitely losing time or
Oh yeah.
or something like that. So therefore you're still losing something, and in that loss really sits grief. And it's about recognizing that grief can come in so many different ways. So once you get the point of it in a way, you then start to know how to deal with it. Or we're not trying to remove grief either. That's another interesting point. We're not trying to get rid of it. We're not trying to reduce it. We're actually learning to live with it. And the whole point of my talk today is the title of it is called Turn Grief into Growth. And so that's what I've done, really, for myself. I've been able to turn my grief into my growth, into my practice, into my understanding, into my awareness, And without grief being just as it is for me, just as it was, I wouldn't be here teaching what I teach, doing what I do, writing the books I write, and sharing all of this knowledge. I wouldn't be here doing that without grief. So in a way, and it sounds a bit strange, and I wouldn't be able to say this just at the point where my mum had died, but moving on from that years later, I've now looking back, I can see that I'm grateful for grief, which sounds very odd because I'm not grateful that my mum died or my dad died. I'm not saying that, but I'm grateful for what it's taught me about me. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. So you've had a life experience, whether it's positive or negative, and you've turned a new chapter, basically, and you're learning to live inside this new chapter. And, whether it's grief or whether it's another emotion that you're dealing with, you learn from everything that happens to you and well, with you. So it does make sense from that perspective. And also from a spiritual perspective, where, well, we were put on this earth to experience human emotions. So that would be part of that growth, or would fit neatly into that. So okay, so what? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you, but that reminds me of a poem that I think everyone really needs to hear. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's called Rumi's The Guest House.
Rumi's The Guest House.
Yeah, I'd like to share it with you because I've learned it by heart, because it really speaks to that little thing that you just said there, which isn't little, it's massive. When we learn to live with our emotions successfully, we're not then trying to avoid them or reduce them. And the guest house is just such a beautiful example of that. And
Hmm.
it's roomy, RUMI. So this being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they are a crowd of sorrows that violently sweep your house, empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honourably. They may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them all at the door laughing and invite them in, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond.
Wow. Yeah, it does fit perfectly, doesn't it? That's beautiful. Yeah.
Mm.
Oh, thank you. Um, okay, before I let you go into the slideshow, what is the most important message for clients who come to you that you give them to understand about grief?
That we are inviting it in,
Mm-hmm.
and we're learning to sit with it as your friend, as your companion, rather than your enemy.
Mm-hmm. All
So,
right.
it is that simple. And, we are there as practitioners, as therapists, to hold that space with them. So we are also their companion in that
Mm-hmm.
space. So basically, what they then learn is that by coming to therapy, that it's safe. They have that space that they can let outpour or allow or whatever it is they need to say. So it's not the same as maybe like a counseling session that will go backwards into the trauma and dig around,
Mm-hmm.
because actually solution focused work is not about that. We
Mm-hmm.
get a picture, but because I'm a solution focused hypnotherapist and also a grief therapist, that's a really interesting blend, because
Mm-hmm.
one's going this way and
Yeah.
one is holding space and can't just quickly go this way. So
Yeah.
I've kind of had to learn to sort of tread between the two spaces quite delicately,
Mm-hmm.
to not just hold that person stuck in that space, but not just quickly move them forward, just like, come on, let's go this way, but just to find a nice balance.
Right. So, that's interesting. So, solution focused, for anyone who doesn't know, can you just explain that as briefly as you can,
Yeah.
how that
It
works?
does what it says on the tin, really. Solution focused means we don't focus on problems, even though obviously people come with a problem. No one comes
Mm.
in thinking everything's great and they just want a very expensive lie down, says nobody. So we know that there's a problem, but we don't dwell in it. We
Mm.
get a snapshot of it, but then we move forward. So that's the solution focused hypnotherapy approach
Hmm.
with the psychotherapy. So that's why I have the two working together.
Hmm. And grief therapy would be looking back to the person, to the loss. Or
But in a way where we're not dwelling either. So there's
Mhm.
a real interesting blend about how much you can let somebody basically cry. It is
Hmm.
about crying, really, because
Yeah.
when they're crying, they're in their very highly charged emotional brain. So
Mm.
it's almost like, if I'm really going to reduce it to um, that type of scenario, they're allowed a tissue and that's
Hmm.
it, you know,
Oh,
if that makes sense.
is that what you do? You allow them one tissue?
I don't obviously say that. You're only allowed one tissue, that's it. But it's almost like that's the sort of idea I'm trying to
Yeah.
get, they can't
Okay. So
have the
you
whole
can cry but
tissue
leave your
box.
baggage behind, or what's the
No, you can't, you just can't use the whole tissue box, you're allowed one.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Right. So now I've lost my train of thought.
We're going to go on to the slideshow, I
And
think.
one tissue each. Yes,
They're
please.
very
Okay.
expensive tissues, you're only allowed one. Sometimes I might even say that if the person, has a good sense of humor.
So do you get lots of laughing in your sessions then, or?
Yes, even though lots of the time we're talking about something very sad, and
Hmm.
very emotive, there's still a lot of laughter, because within laughter there's emotion, emotions including laughter and happiness and joy. So we're allowing all emotions in.
Yeah. Sounds good. Oh, yes, that's the question I had. So you are a solution-focused psychotherapy, you do, and you do grief therapy, and you said it's a fine line you're treading. So how would a bog standard hypnotherapist work with grief? Is that what your framework is for?
Yes, exactly. It's for bringing this framework, which is quite a simple model, into something that looks quite complicated or can appear very complicated, but
Hmm.
actually it's not complicated. It's just
Right.
sometimes the emotional mind might, appear like it's
Hmm.
very complicated, but
Yeah.
it isn't. It's actually very simple. It's not simple maybe to learn. It's just simple to when I say learn, it's not simple to help the client feel like they're being reduced. I don't mean
Mm.
that, I'm not simplifying what they're feeling, but I'm
Yeah.
simplifying how to deal with what they're feeling.
Yeah.
That makes
Hmm. Okay, let's see it.
Okay,
Your
so
floor. I think I
I'm
might
going to share.
remove my spotlight. There you go.
If I click this and press share,
Hmm. Does
okay,
everybody see Dipti?
can
I
you
hope.
see
I
that?
can't see anybody else now. I can see it, yes. So it should be recording.
I can
Mhm.
only see, I can't see the notes anymore. So if anyone does
Oh,
have any questions, maybe then if you can stay across that, Astrid, because I can't
all right.
actually.
Yeah. I'll man the chat, woman the chat.
Thank you. So as I've just spoken about, we're talking about, turning grief into growth. And I'm all about the nervous system. The nervous system, I think, is where we've got to start paying a lot of attention, really. So let me see if I can even move these slides across. There we go. Okay. So remember when I started to say we're not talking about a technique, really. We're not talking about an approach. This is really more about how we're not trying to resolve grief or move away from it or avoid it. We're talking about it to understand how we can shift the nervous system to allow more space for it. And so when we think about grief and we think about grounding, grounding doesn't necessarily just mean, okay, let's put your feet on the floor and imagine roots growing down. That's very reduced. Grounding actually means when we feel solid, when we feel internally stable, we then feel safe. Even though our world can feel wobbly and our emotions can feel erratic, we still have something internally to hold on to. And that is when the nervous system feels steady and grounded. So grief and any type of trauma or anything that's lost or changed significantly in that way tends to destabilize, our brain and our body and our belief systems and everything. We start to wobble, and that means we can then start to lose our reference points to what we thought was real, in our lives. So that's why when I say we're not just talking about insights here or techniques, real growth doesn't just come from those techniques. It comes from feeling as if you can actually handle the growth. So it is a bit like, if you think of a plant that's growing, it's got to have a root system, that's stable first, or a ground that's stable first for it to flourish. So that's really what we're starting with. We're starting with that fundamental grounding. So that framework is all about finding ways to help your client land and arrive. And it could mean simple things like taking a few deep breaths, let's arrive into this system in this moment, in this time. So usually when people are worried or anxious or stressed, they're thinking about the past or they're thinking about the future. They're not in the moment. So actually grounding helps people come into the moment. Soon as we start really figuring out how to get ourselves, not just ourselves, but other people into the moment itself, that's where it starts. Does that make sense? So once we feel we're safe in the moment, it doesn't really matter what's happened before or what's going to happen later. Once we feel safe in the moment, we feel present, that's where the work begins. But then we meet something else. And what we tend to meet then is resistance. And all of us as practitioners know when resistance comes, it might feel like we don't want that client to resist. And so we feel resistant as well, because if they're then asking questions, or if they're testing the boundaries, or if they're prodding and poking, or if they're saying this thing doesn't work, you know, that's only resistance, and that's normal. So I often help people realize, practitioners in particular, to expect resistance. Don't see resistance as a problem or as something that you've done wrong or something that you haven't explained correctly. Resistance is only the body and the mind coming up with a scenario or a problem or a barrier to sort of say, okay, I'm feeling a little bit vulnerable here. So when we're working with emotional vulnerability, it's not as simple as just poking a hole and putting your finger through, because there's going to be something that comes in and goes, no, 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 this isn't okay. Does that make sense? So
Yes, it does.
with that, we've got to understand how to regulate somebody through it. So it's not a pathology. Resistance isn't a problem, is what I'm trying to say here. It's actually that person trying to protect themselves. And the nervous system will always resist when it doesn't yet know or trust the process or trust the person. So it's always about clinical representation. So in a way, sometimes, I don't know if you felt this in your practices, but when people have had other hypnotherapy sessions and it hasn't worked, and then they come to you and they say, oh, I tried another hypnotherapist, it didn't work, but someone else has recommended you, and then you fix them. We know nobody's fixing anybody, they're fixing themselves. But it's really not about your technique. It's about the relationship that you have built, or the rapport that you've built with your client. And in a way, they trust you a little bit more than they trust that other person, for example. So the trust there is about regulation. So as soon as we can get that trust amplified, we're getting them more regulated and we're getting them less resistant, if that makes sense. So then after the trust has been built, we then start to get a little bit deeper into who this person is and what they're missing, you know. So as I've been talking about, grief doesn't just mean death, as in a bereavement. It can mean a death of, you know, relationship, or a death of identity mainly, and a death of job or something, you know, so a loss or a finishing of something. So therefore, because we've, as human beings, linked our identity to certain things, for example, if someone's just lost, I don't know, their house or something, then that's not just a house, it's part of their identity. You know, if you're saying someone's lost a child, you know, that's part of their identity. If someone's lost a relationship, that's part of their identity. If someone has lost their job, that's part of their identity. So identity formulation is such a huge thing here. So when loss creates this kind of, I suppose, wobbliness in their old map, and if we think about NLP, you know, one of the pillars of NLP is the map is not the territory. We're really trying to explain that, aren't we? So loss breaks the old map, and then we start to have an interesting conversation about how we are reorientating into wholeness and kind of bringing all these bits together, really. So wholeness starts to create a kind of new way of being. So when we are dealing with healing identity, we're also then helping somebody have a different relationship with kind of new version of themselves. So then once we're going through that process, we then get deeper again into emotional overwhelm. Because if now we're thinking this person has to create a new version of themselves, already they're feeling quite vulnerable and, you know, a bit like there's too much going on. We want to now find a way to reduce all of this emotional overwhelm for them. And there's a word that I often use, and not many people know what the word means: titration. Has anyone heard of titration? Derek, you are nodding. Of course you've heard of titration. I would expect you to know. And for those of you who don't understand what titration means, it's a very important clinical reference point. It's when there are, if we're talking of especially about emotional overwhelm, there are so many moving parts and so many components. The healing happens on a layered level. So it's, and this is one of the solution focused kind of ways of dealing with anything, not just grief, but we're dealing with it in tiny moments, tiny bits, you know, small, like small, tiny changes. A bit like layers, you know, if you're painting your nails. Those of you who used to paint your nails back in the day before we had nail technicians doing it for us, a thin layer, let it dry, another thin layer, let it dry, another thin layer, let it dry. If you just did one whole thick thing at once, then you go and put your hands in washing up gloves and then it's all ruined, you know. This is that sort of idea. We're just doing things in thin layers, and that's titration. So I'm going to do a demonstration with you, if that's okay, if that's something
Of course,
that you
yeah.
experience. It's quite an interesting one to feel. So is everyone okay with the demo? Just say if you're not, but if you're okay, I can't actually see everybody. I can only see 2 people. I'm hoping everyone's saying yes. Okay, so let's just get a little bit comfortable in your chairs for now. You don't have to close your eyes, but it might be useful to close your eyes because then you can really just let my voice flow over you. But for now, just get comfortable. And if you haven't closed your eyes, just perhaps lower your gaze. And as you just take a few breaths in and out, I'd like you to place one hand somewhere neutral, perhaps on your chest, and somewhere also on your belly. So one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly. And just take a few moments to breathe and land and arrive into this moment right here, right now. So begin to use your breath to help you ground, to help you settle. Just doing whatever you need to do to find your way into this moment in time. And when you do feel that you're here, present in this moment, just nod your head for me so I know that you're feeling ready. Okay, nice. So I'm going to ask you to briefly recall a mild emotional experience that perhaps felt a little bit wobbly. So nothing major, just sort of about 2 or 3 on your scale of wobbliness. So just something like an issue that you want to deal with or you feel that isn't quite resolved in your life. So just briefly recall that now. And when you recall it, just notice where you feel that in your body. So not really in your mind. I know you can think it through, but just bring it into your body. Notice where you feel it. Just experience it there without trying to change it, without trying to amplify it or reduce it. Just bring that there. Just feel it there. Okay, now leave that there, but bring your attention now back into the room. So open your eyes and look at the screen again and look at me. And also look around your room. So whatever you can see around your room, just name 2 or 3 things that you can see around you. You know, like I can see a vase or I can see a window. Just name 2 or 3 things. Okay, perfect. And come back to where you were, closing your eyes again, bringing your attention back to your heart space and your belly. And bring your attention back to that place that you felt, that feeling. And just notice it. Notice that feeling again. Don't try and change it, just notice. Good, and then bring your attention back to me again, back to me, opening your eyes. And again, maybe find another 2 or 3 different things this time, different things to pay attention to in your room, and name them in your head. Okay, good, good, well done. And then back again, back into that, closing your eyes. So this is like a fractionation technique, if you know what that's like, and bringing your experience back into that feeling. Nice. And then when you come back into the room again, just breathing that feeling away, not like you're letting it go and you're not trying to get rid of it, but just sort of breathe it away, that it's no longer a part of this experience right here, right now. And just take a moment to come back into the session that we're in now. So it might be interesting just to share, if you want to, what happened with that experience, if anything. Maybe nothing, but something may have happened. Would anyone like to share?
If you'd like to share, you can go ahead and unmute yourselves or put it into the chat. I'll read it out. But to me, it seems to be becoming less. Is that right?
Did it become less for you?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Became less for me. Yep.
It did, yes.
Yep.
And we know why, because it's in a way we're bringing both nervous systems together in that experience, aren't we? So on one level, we're holding the emotional space for it, and on another level, we're bringing reality in at the same time. So reality includes logic, and includes the real world as it is, what we can actually sort of sense and see in the moment. And when you're bringing emotional and logical together like that, I call that emogic balance. It's a portmanteau of emotional and logical. So when we've got emogic balance, we are not trying to avoid emotion or reduce it or pretend it's not there. We are bringing it in for the logical lens, or the left prefrontal cortex part of our system, to shine a spotlight on it to help us balance, if that makes sense. So that's just an invitation for titration, and using the fractionation system, which is one of my favorite things to do, is something that we can help our clients with. So titration is like touching the trauma or the grief and then releasing it, and then touching it again, and then releasing it, and then touching it again. And in that touching, or that recalling and the revivification of the now, it's almost like a kind of like an exposure therapy for the emotions, not a physical exposure, but an emotional exposure. I'm not a fan of exposure therapy as a model, but if we're thinking about that as an emotional exposure therapy, you're doing it in a safe place. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. So would you do one per session, or would you do like 10 emotions with a client, or how would you work
I
with
think
that?
you can ask them to to get the sense of the whole picture, because we
Mm-hmm.
don't want to get them into this and then that and then this and then that, you know,
Mm-hmm.
because it's really just, if we talk about grief as a thing,
Mm-hmm.
it's basically encompassing guilt, loneliness, shame, blame, whatever, you know, the whole grief system. We
Yeah.
don't have to get there and get our knife and fork out and start to dissect it.
Oh, so the 2 or 3 on the scale was just for us for the demo now. Okay,
Exactly.
right. Okay.
So that's a good question, because it's really good to remember that we're not diving into this and, you know, getting into the problem with them as well. We're just getting them to sort of experience the whole feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And then that way it actually does 2 things that is really powerful. If they can experience the whole lot and still be okay, that is the work, isn't it? Which is very powerful. So what they've already done in a way before they've got to us really is already they've fragmented everything. Their experience is already fragmented. So what we're trying to do, and that's why it's emotionally overwhelming, because it's all over the place, you know, it's like someone's just tipped out a whole bucket of sawdust. It's everywhere, you know. Excuse me. And what we're doing really is helping them kind of bring it all together. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, thank you.
So, what have I done? I pressed something strange. Okay. So, there we go. Excuse me, got a frog. I've caught your thing, Astrid.
Oh, we managed.
We managed to do it. Well done over Zoom. Okay, so as we've just talked about fragmentation, when the nervous system feels emotionally overwhelmed, it's already fragmented. So now what we're trying to do is bring all of those fragments together. That's why we're not trying to say, we're not isolating shame or sadness or anxiety or fear or whatever. We're bringing it all together and we're learning to balance the whole thing at once. And so the nervous system then feels as if it can be okay with holding that whole thing. So homeostasis is just basically the brain's way and the body's way and the emotional way of finding itself into neutral, and it's finding itself into balance. Homeostasis isn't happiness, you know, it's not named as happiness or joy, it's just balance. So it can feel quite boring, you know. When people say to me, oh, I've had a bit of a boring week, I'm there celebrating, because it means that they're not peaking and they're not troughing, you know, they're just in this nicely bored state. I help people feel bored, yay. You know, if we're bored, we're not going up and down like a yo-yo, are we? We're just neutral. Yeah. And that's really what we're aiming for with grief. You know, we want to get into bored. We want to get into homeostasis. That would just be their word. You know, nobody says, oh, I'm feeling a bit like I'm in homeostasis today, do they? They'll come out with normal, regular language like, I feel bored, or I feel everything's just been a bit, you know, okay, or level, you know, and they'll use those types of words. And when they start using those types of words, we can be like, yes, you know, that's good. Okay, and then the last slide is just a bit of a summary, really, how we are turning the grief into the growth. We're not really avoiding the grief or turning grief into a process or a protocol where we're moving it into growth, and we're doing it by these kind of systems, really, where we're grounding, regulating, orientating, finding wholeness, helping them touch and titrate, and then coming into homeostasis. That's it.
All right. I have a few questions. Let's start with Hillary's question first. So in your work, you're not letting the clients go into the story too much. Is there a place for that? How do you move them on from the story?
they come in and they really want to tell you the story, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
They really do. They're so identified with the story. So it's a really it's a very fine balance, isn't it? Because we don't want them to feel like they couldn't share or they couldn't explain. So again, it's about finding a way where they're allowed to have, you know, like that idea of the one tissue. They're allowed to have a certain amount of time where they share their stories. They feel heard, they feel held, they feel like I've listened. But then there has to come a point where, as a practitioner, I think you're going to get a gut instinct of going, oh God, okay, I need them to stop now. You know what I mean? There is a point, isn't there, where we just know if it goes any further, we've lost control, sort of thing, you know? So as a practitioner, I mean, maybe when you're brand new, you might not have a sense of that yet. But if you are, you know, you've been kind of well rehearsed in seeing clients, you kind of probably know where that tipping point is. If you are brand new, I think you've just got to learn through doing. You know, there isn't a point where you go, right, you've had 5 minutes, off we go, now we're doing this bit. It might not work with time, you know, but it's more about an energy. So I suppose the way I would describe it is if we think we can, like if we can imagine we can actually personify the emotional system. If, say, grief came into the room with them, which it does, obviously, if grief was sitting next to them, and if the person had a microphone and grief had the microphone, and you think you're the one that's sort of interviewing these people, you don't want grief to just hold the microphone and have too much of the stage. You want the person to also be able to share. So if you can imagine that scenario, we've got to take the microphone away from grief and give it back to the person. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you use that image for clients as well?
No, I would just use it for me. I'm like, oh my God, I just had that mic. It's like a bad karaoke sometimes, you know, you've got to take the mic away.
Tell me about bad karaoke. All
So
right.
can I ask then, so what are you actually doing with the clients? So you're giving them grounding practices, nervous system regulation practices, and what work on top of
When
that?
they are feeling grounded, this is the interesting thing. When they actually are feeling much more grounded, much more regulated, they're much more in their intellectual thinking part of their mind anyway, and less in their emotional mind. That's done it for you. So the story, the emotional grip of the story isn't living in their intellectual mind, it's living in their emotional anyway.
But
So
what work are you doing on top of that then? So what are you?
So they're getting them to ground, as in, I mean, when I actually do the work, it's so unique to that person. That's what I mean. That's what I was trying to say to you. There's no actual here's this step, here's this step, here's this step. It's so unique to the person. That's why you've got to understand the principle. So it's about getting somebody from that story, emotional, I need to hold on to that, to okay, I'm safe here, to let go of that. So it's really hard. The reason why I'm struggling is because it's hard to put into language. It's more of a felt experience. So the way I would probably share that with you, Hilary, is by helping you feel it rather than talk you through it. So if we go back to the titration thing that you felt, you know, when we did it, tell me what happened with you there.
No, nothing happened with me there.
So when you were doing it, you didn't feel anything.
No, because I was too busy trying to listen to the technique and to learn what you were giving me as opposed to me actually going into it.
Okay, so the first thing I said was there's no technique. So
Mm.
let's do it together. What if this is the hardest thing for most practitioners and hypnotherapists to get their head around, that there's no technique. That's the hardest thing to get your head around.
Yeah, but what you're doing is what I do a lot with clients anyway,
There we
is
go.
yes. I mean, so I do that, but I'm just curious then, once you have the nervous system regulated, I'm just curious what else you're doing on top of that. Does that make sense? You know, like, are you doing
Yeah. So once you have the nervous system regulated, because I then do solution focused hypnotherapy, when I get my client onto the couch, they're already in a calm state. So then the hypnotherapy part of the session is, I suppose, landing.
that's the bit I want to know what you're doing there.
So then that's actually a whole other extra, because I have a system called free flow transformation therapy, which is a whole other next session thing. It's not something I can quickly talk about, as an add-on, if that makes sense. But that's something I can definitely share in another extra bit, or
We'll have to do
we
another
can
episode.
deep dive into that.
Or do you have a course or workshop on that anywhere? Or
I do take people through the system, but I only take a few people at a time because it's very deep work. So especially if it's online, I would probably see 4 people on one course at once, no more than that. Yeah.
same. So that's the same with the
I'll
free flow
quickly give you
transformation as yeah.
yeah.
We will put all
Free
the
flow
links into the show notes, by the way. So you said earlier you had a workshop for grief and then also for the free flow, and both you would only take 4 people each.
Yeah, with my work, I feel that I need to really give people one-to-one as much as I can, or 1-to-4 is about similar to 1-to-1. But just quickly, Hilary, free flow transformation therapy is unscripted. So I never use language patterns and I never use scripts. I listen to my clients' language, and I call them linguistic fingerprints. So the linguistic fingerprints are the words they choose to use in the order that they choose to use them. And I basically write a few words down, and that becomes their language pattern. And so then they feel as if that is so them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But remember, we're not talking problems, we're talking solutions. So that's why I can't write their problems down as their trance pattern, because that's not what we want to help them with. We want to help them with their solutions. So that's why I'm getting them into their calm, balanced, regulated state before that, so they can give me their positive language pattern, or what they want to achieve rather than what they want to avoid, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so then the free flow transformation is that they get. Sorry, that's really quick, but that's just a quick explanation of what I do.
So grief, what we've learned about grief today is the framework and the work itself that you do to get to those places, to those the wholeness, the identity, the new, oh God, I haven't got it in my face anymore, the new identity, new life. That is the individual work. So similar to my tinnitus course, Hilary.
Exactly the same.
Okay. Bye, Derek.
Hi, Derek.
Yeah, I have to go, I'm afraid, but I have left a question in Astrid's away.
I'll ask it. I want to get first into the framework for a moment. Going back to resistance, of course, we remove resistance by rapport and all of those little tricks that we learn in our hypnotherapy training. But how else would you remove resistance from a client with grief? Is there any special way, anything specific?
Resistance doesn't like to be found out. So resistance is one of these, things that we all have, and no one really likes to be named and shamed as the resistant one, So I don't ever mention the word, but I always talk about the part of them that isn't willing, or the part of them that is worried, or the part of them that has that question. You know, so it's almost like I bring that part in as a separate thing, as if they were looking at that part. So in a way, you're taking it out of them and you're putting it over here anyway. So for example, if that part of you was sitting next to you now, how would you know it was there? What does it look like? You know, so people can reference that in so many different ways, depending on what they see, hear, feel, believe, think, you know. Some people can't personalize it and they don't want to be sitting next to it. So I have to then find another way of how they would do that. So all I'm looking for is a way to separate from them.
Right.
So can we put this over here? Can we put it over here? Can we make some space? You know? So we're trying to get the resistance to be less attached to that person.
So you are essentially you're normalizing resistance and you're putting it out there, right? Yeah. Okay. That's good. That's a bit NLP.
Yeah.
Correct? Yeah. Okay. Okay. And wholeness. You go from fragmentation to wholeness.
Yeah.
How does that work? I know I'm asking for a technique, really, but
no, but you're not. You're asking. You're just reminding everybody that it's that titration. So if you go back to the layer thing that I was telling you about, if things are already fragmented, that means there must be lots and lots of parts. So with all of those parts, how can we collect them all together to create a whole? You know, like a jigsaw piece puzzle, there's loads of pieces, you know, and they're all scattered around in the box. But you need all of the pieces to put them all together to create the whole picture. So this is the same thing. Our emotional system is scattered, you know, and that's why we're feeling overwhelmed, because there's no container. It's messy, you know, it's all over the place. So really what we're doing, I suppose, okay, there's no technique, but if I were pushed to talk about a technique,
you would use a puzzle metaphor. No.
The technique is finding a container to put all this mess in.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Yeah. So yeah. So the container in some way, shape, or form, would you use a metaphor as a container? Like, for example, you've got a puzzle, you're putting it on a puzzle mat or similar
Depends
to
on
that.
what the client is talking about. And that comes back to free flow transformation therapy. We're listening for their language. And this is what NLP people do all the time, is you become them in a way. You're pacing and leading because their words are their experience. You know, it's their map of the world. It's not my map. It's not your map. It's theirs. So when we are listening to their language and we are mirroring back their language, we then feel heard. And sometimes they'll even say, how did you know I thought like that? Well, you just told me.
Yeah. We get that a lot, don't we?
Think,
but how do you know, like, you come up with the word fragmentation. How do you know? How do clients explain that to you?
So they'll be all right. We'll know they'll be all over the place, won't they? You know, they'll go from this thought, this idea, this conversation, this thing, that he said that, she said that. They'll be all over the place. They'll be scattered. That is fragmentation showing up in your therapy. So then what we've got to do is almost like be the capture of all of it, you know, and start bringing it all in, so it starts to feel so much more cohesive. Because when they go out with a feeling of cohesion, they go out with a feeling of stability, like it's not overwhelmed anymore. We're feeling more regulated. That's the opposite of overwhelm.
And how many sessions do you normally use or need for a client? Can it be one session, or do you work in 10 sessions? I have no idea whether you've got a structure there.
With grief, I always say to people, come for your initial consultation. And then, depending on how scattered they might be, then that's when I'm able to say, you know what, I think you're more like 12.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Or, because grief is such because we're going into titration, we're doing it layer by layer, you know, and the whole point isn't that the therapist can fix you quickly, therefore that's not the point of grief work.
Yeah.
The point is people want you to be with them while
Mm.
they're going through this.
Mm-hmm.
And this might mean it lasts a year. This might mean it lasts 5 years. That's the whole point. That's the difference between psychotherapy and, I suppose, just hypnotherapy. Solution-focused hypnotherapy, anyway, is always between. We do smoking cessation with one session. Then, I mean, I have had clients who have been with me for 5 years.
Wow.
And they don't come every week, but they might come every month,
Ah, right. Okay.
Because they just recognize the value of maintenance,
Okay, so you don't just give them like, or would this happen that you give them a one session push and they heal themselves afterwards? Some come in for maintenance, some are, or are you with them for the whole journey often?
I'm with them.
You are. Okay, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not just like giving them a push and they heal by themselves through
No, but I
your
do recognize
help.
that there are some hypnotherapy models that won't line up with that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, just because your hypnotherapy, exactly, there's no timetable for grief. Thank you, Hilary. That's the best way of saying it.
No, I don't mean it's just a question for generally hypnotherapists who are going to ask, so do I do all of this titration in one session or do I do it, well, over 5 years, as you said?
I mean, it doesn't have to be 5 years either, no. So
yeah, no.
in general,
There's no timetable for grief, yeah.
Maybe 8 times, 8 to 12, over a few weeks or months. And then I can slowly gauge, where they're at really. Because it's more of a hand-holding process as well, a heart-holding process. And then they might then say, and I'm always basing this on the client. I say to them, do you want to come back? Not you've got to come in this amount of times. Because there's no structure like that. It's about what they need.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not just a phobia you're removing, it's something much more complicated.
Yeah, grief is not a phobia.
No. No, I'm just phobias as an example because we usually, spider phobia is one session, you're done, 20 minutes out the door.
Yes, yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. Okay, so I'm going to get to Derek's question now, which is quite long, so bear with me. I have another client who has PTSD. He has seen several therapists and has engaged in various approaches, including EMDR. He appears now to be unaffected by the trauma. He can talk about it without the emotional attachment. What he cannot seem to move on from is the fact that he has lost 8 years of his life as he recovered from his trauma. He was a very high-end lawyer and he lost his job. He lost his partner when his relationship broke down due to trauma, and he lost a lot of friends. He doesn't go out much or socialize. I guess fundamentally, he has lost his identity and is still grieving. How can I help him accept and move forward?
Oh,
Hope
wow.
you can offer some thoughts on this.
That's a really, really good question. And it's exactly the type of scenario that, will come. We think we've ticked that box, emotions have been put in the right place, but actually there's this massive thing that's still unresolved. And so what we're doing here is we have to work out and it's hard to just use that person as a case study from just the words. But when you go into he's a high, did you say he was a high achiever?
High-end lawyer. Yeah, so I guess high achiever as well, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So if we think about, I mean, I don't know the guy, so I'm just using this as an example. Like, say I had a high-end lawyer, which is high achieving, who is somebody who charges with time. A solicitor or a lawyer charge for their services by the minute. They're the only
by the minute. Wow.
Industry that.
Yeah.
So therefore, their value of time is highly important. Time equals money. So if we understand that as a concept, that if that was his concept, we can then bring that as a value into his awareness. So rather than Derek saying, oh, do you realize time is money? No, we want to be able, that guy, to realize the time that he is, I suppose, not accepting has been then, we're not going back into the past to give him a stick to beat himself up with, going, shit, I should have done this by now. That's not the case. But from now moving forward, how can we then create value in your time going forwards?
Right.
So this is all about him valuing his time. And just because he's spent the time grieving, that's still valuable, but now can we change the way this moves forward for you? Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. So it's like a reverse sunk cost fallacy. Does that mean so
what,
yeah, you've already spent so much money on your car, so you're going to put even more money into it to fix it again because there's so much money in it already. So you would be reversing it, like, don't waste any more money on this.
Learn to let
and move on and start making money with it.
I've kind of done my best. I'm now letting this one go. That's exactly it. Yeah.
Okay. Right. I don't know whether that made sense, but kind of. All right. Okay. Any more questions, guys, before we go? If you do, unmute yourselves or put it into the chat. Otherwise, I'll ask you, Dipti, what is it that we haven't touched on yet that you would like hypnotherapists or people who are grieving to know?
I suppose my main message for everybody who is grieving is that you're not alone. There is help and there's nothing wrong with you. It's absolutely normal. Everyone on the planet is grieving something.
Are there people who think they're not normal for grieving?
Well, there's 1% of the population who can't grieve, actually.
Right.
And
Wow.
I don't know how much that is in terms of the population of the world, but it's quite a lot of people. And does anyone know, as a fun fact, what those people are called?
Nope.
Psychopaths.
I was going to say narcissists.
Psychopaths.
Sorry, I was on the wrong path.
So psychopaths have no ability to feel grief. So one time I said to a client, when they, who was asking about how much can I go into the story, blah, 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 if they're going on and on and on and on about the story and being so attached to their grief. And the only way I could break this story was to say, well, thank God you're not a psychopath. And that stopped them, because you've got to find a way to just get there to stop that story from re-going over and over. And they laughed. And that stopped them. And then I was able to come in and kind of carry on with the session.
Right. So you give them a shock, really, and shock them out of their story.
Sometimes it works. It depends on the person, obviously. But by the time you've sat with them, you can all gauge whether or not, I'm not sitting there thinking, I need a sentence. It just comes, doesn't it? You're in that space with somebody, you just know what to do, don't you?
Yeah. Well, this has been incredibly enlightening. So I know a lot more about grief now. And thank you so much for coming on, Dipti. It was wonderful to have you. And thank you, everybody, for being here and taking part. And everybody who's watching the replay, any links, any things that we've mentioned, like Dipti's books and the workshops, etc., they're going to be in the show notes or in the comments. And thank you so much for today. Yeah, you're welcome. And the next session, I can't remember. I will put that information into the group, Mind Explorations, on Facebook. If you are a hypnotherapist, NLP practitioner, or a student to become one, come on and join us. There's over 900 members as of this moment, which is pretty cool. I would have never expected that. Thank you both. And thank everybody for coming here, and have a wonderful morning, midday, evening, whatever it is. Okay, bye-bye. See you next time.